There's going to be some people out there who really love this PC, and a whole bunch more who absolutely hate it. And that's kind of the idea. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. PC gaming just isn't affordable anymore. At least that's the popular line to say over the last couple years. And when looking at the price of new parts, there's definitely some merit to that statement. Since 2017, we've gone from flagship GPUs like the GTX 1080, priced at $599, to now costing north of $1,300 for the RTX 5080. Low-end GPUs like the RTX 5060 Ti have crept up from $250 to now north of $450 or even $500. And that's if you can even find a card in stock or at MSRP. I guess, in a way, my channel has always been aimed to subvert expectations when it comes to PC hardware, to show what's possible if you think outside the box and ignore some of the rules of PC building. To build a gaming PC, there's a list of hardware that you need. A motherboard, CPU, CPU cooler, memory, graphics card, storage, power supply, and a case to put all of it in. And if you subscribe to the rules of PC building, you're likely going to start writing angry comments down below telling me why all the parts I'm about to list should never be used or why I'm doing all of this wrong. So please, at any point, feel free to pause this video and voice your opinions down below. Let's start off with the motherboard and CPU, the foundation of any PC build. I wanted to build as cheap of a PC as possible, and what I found definitely fits the cheap definition. For those who have been following me since the beginning, it should be no surprise I'm going with an AliExpress X99 motherboard along with a used Xeon CPU. What's a bit different about this combo though is the price. See, the motherboard, CPU, and memory for this build cost me just $63 after shipping. That's most of the system built for less than the cost of a 500 watt power supply. And this isn't some cast-off 4-core Xeon at 1.8 GHz either. This is a Xeon E5 2680 V4, a Broadwell-based Xeon with 14 cores and 28 threads, along with a turbo of up to 3.3 GHz. Not exactly cutting edge, but competent enough to play most games at reasonable settings. If you're making a list, this purchase alone should be setting off alarm bells for breaking the gaming PC building rules. A Xeon CPU can't play games. It only turbos to 3.3 GHz. That AliExpress motherboard VRM looks sketchy AF. And is that dual channel memory on a quad channel system? You bet your ass it is. We're going to be running two 8GB sticks of DDR4 2133 in this build. So not only are we only using half of the available memory channels, we're also only running 16GB of the slowest possible DDR4 inside of this system. For a CPU cooler, I probably overspent a bit, but I wanted to try out the Snowman 92mm tower cooler. It was $31 and included RGB fans. Now imagine my surprise when the fans turned out to be R, G, and B instead of configurable colors. Yep, I've never fallen for that one before. For storage, we don't have a lot of options here, as there's only a single M.2 slot on this board. I'm going to go with the tried and true Silicon Power A60 1TB SSD for both the OS and game installs. It's a Gen 3x4 NVMe drive with read and write speeds that approach 3000 megabytes per second, and in my experience has been very solid and reliable. Next up, the graphics card. In keeping this PC as cheap as possible, there are a number of options out there. There's the darling of budget gamers everywhere in the RX 580, which you can have for about $100 on AliExpress. There's also a 1660 Super, or even an RX 5700. But I opted to go with a card that everyone disliked from its initial release as a terrible value, in the 8GB RTX 3050. There's no arguing against the frames per dollar that you don't get on this GPU. Compared to cards like the RTX 3060 or any GPU over $500 at that time, the RTX 3050 was lousy by comparison. It was a $249 card that had barely 60% of the performance of the RTX 3060, while selling for only 20% less at retail. But here's the thing. Poor value or not, sometimes you just don't have extra money to toss at your gaming PC, and you have to buy the parts that fit within your budget. Sure, the new frame per dollar king today is the RX 9070 XT, but it has a street price of nearly $900. If all you have is RTX 4060 money, that's the card you're going to end up buying. And according to the Steam hardware survey, entry-level GPUs are far more popular than their more expensive brethren, with 9 out of the top 10 most popular GPUs in the Steam hardware survey today being either 50 or 60 class cards. So, with all of your main components picked out, there's only a couple more details to cover. How are you going to power them, and what case can you get to hold them? A gaming PC draws a ton of power, so obviously this is going to need a 650 or even 800 watt power supply to make sure the rig even turns on, right? Which is why I went with the obvious choice of an 8-year-old 430 watt power supply from EVGA. Let's break this down for anyone who's already angrily typing that this system is going to melt to the ground the second that I put a load on it. The Xeon E5 2680V4 is rated at a 120 watt TDP. However, even during AVX workloads, this CPU barely climbs to 60 watts. It's not that power hungry of a CPU and doesn't even approach the 100 watt limit, let alone 120 watts as Intel indicated on their charts. The RTX 3050 is a 130 watt TDP card, but during testing pulled closer to 110 watts during gaming. Memory is between 2 to 4 watts per DDR4 DIMM and probably on the lower side of things, seeing as how I'm running at 2133. The motherboard, chipset, and all the associated hardware are probably good for around 10 watts at max draw. Fans and RGB lighting, maybe another 10 watts considering we have 5 total fans in here and all of the lights associated with them. Adding all that up gives us a max potential power draw, if you believe every manufacturer's rating, of only 275 watts, or less than 2/3 of the 430 watt power supply that I have in here. The power draw is so minimal, I could add another RTX 3050 and still be under 400 watts. And finally, let's put the whole rig together. Sticking with the extreme budget theme, I also wanted it to look like a gaming PC, so I found this beauty on Amazon for just $41. This is the Alamengda, I believe is how you pronounce that, V500, a micro ATX case with a tempered glass side panel. And that's the complete list of specs. That's literally it. It holds a motherboard, it has tempered glass, and does basically nothing else. There are no hard drives or SSD mounts, so the single M.2 drive that we have on this motherboard is all we have to work with. While you can mount up to 320mm fans, the grills are not exactly friendly when it comes to airflow. It also supports GPUs up to 320mm long, but I think that's only if you have one of those fancy wireless power supplies, or adapt an SFX power supply to fit in the top of here. Also, these fans weren't even included in the case, and I wanted to add a splash of color to this, so I chose this 3-pack of ARGB fans from Thermalright, along with a generic ARGB controller for them, for a grand total of $19. Now, I'm sure if the rest of this build didn't irritate someone, this case will surely bring the airflow fanatics into my comments. It has a solid front panel, so there's no airflow getting into the front of this case. The only intake for this case is at the bottom, and it's heavily restricted and only blows air directly into the GPU. The GPU, it's just going to sling all of its hot air into the CPU above it. And by the way I have this oriented, the CPU and power supply are going to be fighting for the hot air exhaust from the GPU. There's only a single fan exhaust on the top, and it's also heavily restricted. There is no rear fan, which means the CPU can't properly blow all of its hot air out of the back of the system. So this is just a hot box designed to kill hardware and nothing else. So, does everyone have their grievances and angry comments typed out and all their bones to pick in order? Good. Here's why everything that I built here is absolutely perfect the way it is. Let's start with the case and thermals. At $40, this is the cheapest tempered glass case that money can buy. With such a restrictive airflow setup and only a 92mm CPU cooler installed, you might expect CPU and GPU temps to suffer. Except you'd be wrong. Under a full Cinebench stress test, I saw the max core temperature hit just 49 degrees Celsius. And while gaming, the RTX 3050 barely maxed out at 65 degrees Celsius, with the CPU barely touching 40 during gaming. Thermals are not only not a problem, they're downright amazing. See, electricity goes into a PC and performance and frames come out, but the byproduct of that is heat. A PC that draws 800 watts can churn out enough heat to keep your office warm in the winter. But at maybe 150 watts while gaming, there's just not that much energy in the system, and so temperatures stay low. But, what about gaming performance? Is the RTX 3050 8GB truly a worthless GPU that should have never been made? While it may not produce as many frames per dollar as an RTX 4060 does, it's also half the price of an RTX 4060 today. In fact, the going price for an RTX 4060 is about $389, which is almost the entire total cost of this entire PC. So, take that for what it's worth. Are you going to be able to play at 1440p ultra settings and 180Hz on an RTX 3050 paired with a 9-year-old Xeon CPU? Of course not. But what if your goal was to just play games? Well, this PC will definitely do that, and better than you might expect. Let's start off with a couple of the most demanding games that are out today and work our way down from there. Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p, medium settings, and DLSS 4 performance mode manages 63 frames per second on average, a 1% low of 45, and a 0.1% low of 40. While we don't have any of the RTX eye candy enabled, the game is still more than playable and even enjoyable at these settings. The game certainly looks better with RTX, especially full path tracing enabled, but if you're wanting to play this game for the gameplay and the story, the graphics make little to no difference here. Much like Cyberpunk 2077, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is another sprawling open-world game with insanely high system requirements, but the sub-$450 PC makes short work of it at 1080p and medium settings, managing 72 frames per second on average with a low of just 43. Again, surprisingly consistent frame rates given this is a very demanding modern title. And while it definitely looks a bit sharper at higher detail settings, I don't think you're going to be getting a massively different experience simply because you could play it ultra instead of medium. As of the time of filming, Cyberpunk and Kingdom Come 2 are the 46th and 54th most played games on Steam, with around 35,000 active players per day. Well, the number one game, and it's not even close in that metric, is Counter-Strike 2, with 1.6 million players per day. And even this lowly $433 gaming PC had no trouble with it at 1080p and max settings, with an average of 117 FPS and a low of 40. There were a couple minor stutters during gameplay, but nothing that was too costly when talking about movement or aiming. But of course, that's my viewpoint as a casual player who likes to scrimmage against bots. If you play CS2 competitively online, unless you have a mid-tier or higher GPU, you're likely playing at minimum settings to maximize your performance. At low settings, we get a massive improvement with an average of 186 frames per second and a low of 72. At the low end of things, that's nearly a 10 millisecond improvement in frame times, which is a significant and noticeable difference for Twitch shooters like this. Another game that has been massively popular as of late is the recent Schedule 1, or as we called the text-only version on Windows 3.1 and graphing calculators, Dope Wars. The game is in early access right now, but that doesn't seem to be stopping 250,000 people from playing it every day. Now, unfortunately, whether it's the older CPU or the low-end GPU, something about Schedule 1 does not like this hardware configuration. At every graphical preset, we get an average of around 35 frames per second, with some pretty stuttery gameplay. This seems like it might be a CPU scheduling issue, as my core clocks didn't seem to boost up from their idle state, staying down at around 800 MHz, even though we're seeing around 25% total utilization on the CPU. I even tried changing the CPU priority for Schedule 1 from automatic to high in Task Manager, and that made no difference at all. The GPU is definitely more than up to the task, as we saw less than 50% utilization the entire time. Of all the games you might have predicted this PC to be struggling with, I'm guessing Schedule 1 was not on that list. Hopefully this is a bug that can be fixed later on, as I'm sure it's going to be a very popular game for a very long time, and it'd be great to see it run well on lower-end machines like this. Warframe is a third-person shooter that sees around 50,000 players per day, and is still hugely popular for a game that launched nearly 13 years ago. While this hardware was able to hold an average of 173 FPS at high settings, it did suffer from some stuttering at times, with 0.1% lows below 20. It wasn't stuttering all the time, with only a few specific moments being noticeable, see the 1% low of 89 frames per second. But I did get a bit frustrated at times when trying to aim and the screen would pause for what felt like an eternity in that moment. Dropping down to medium settings helped things on paper, see a low of 39 FPS now, but made little impact on the perceived smoothness. The average frame rate jumped up to 272 frames per second, with the 1% low also climbing to 142. But that stutter just wouldn't completely go away. And I couldn't find an obvious culprit, with the CPU barely being taxed at all, sitting at around 10% utilization the entire time. This could be another issue with the CPU not clocking up in response to required loads, even though I set Windows to use Ultra Performance mode in the power settings. A little more investigation might be needed on this motherboard to see if we can eliminate issues like this entirely, and improve performance on games like Warframe and Schedule 1. Rocket League has no problem at all at max settings, hitting an average of 294 frames per second with a low of only 84. I'm not unhappy with that result at all, but if you wanted to improve the low frame rates, there's more than enough graphical settings to turn down to eke out some more performance. And last but not least, Wreckfest is one of my favorite games of all time, and it loves to stress out less powerful CPUs with its 24-car races and liquid physics models. But we ran into no such trouble here, with an average of 140 FPS and a low of 55. Not much more can be said about this one, as gameplay was smooth and predictable overall. I just can't wait for Wreckfest 2 to come out, as I've been having a blast with the demo in the last couple of weeks. Overall, some pretty solid performance, with one major outlier in Schedule 1. But I don't think that's outrageous though, considering that game is from a solo developer in an early access title. And the game is still playable if you want. I mean, we all played Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom with far worse frame rates than this. So, why did I build this PC? Why did I choose parts that I knew people were probably going to have a problem with? Why did I not spend the extra $150 to guarantee a better experience? For starters, not everyone has the option of saving an extra $150, especially with the rising cost of living that we're going through right now. And $450 for this gaming PC is still a lot of money. One of my favorite phrases is "comparison is the thief of joy," and I think that sums up this PC quite nicely. There are better parts out there. There are better deals to be had, both on the new and the used markets. But at the end of the day, if this was the PC that I had, it's probably going to play the games that I want to play. And for all of the poor build decisions that I included, and all of the rule breaking that I did, nothing stopped me from playing games or put the PC hardware in any danger. In fact, the system runs perfectly well. But Jeff, some of you are angrily typing right now. I'm angering a lot of people in this video. You usually game on an RTX 5090. Don't patronize those who don't have top-end parts. Here's the kicker of this video. While I do have access to basically whatever parts I want to use, this RTX 3050 came out of my personal gaming rig, where I've done the majority of my gaming over the last 2 years. See, my wife and I both have gaming PCs in the living room. I built a dual battle station desk for both of us to use a couple years ago. While I had originally thought of using laptops and remote gaming PCs hosted on my server, I opted instead to build some low-power ITX boxes for my wife and I to game on. My gaming rig over the last 2 years has been a Ryzen 3600 with 16 gigs of memory, and this RTX 3050. I have played in their entirety Baldur's Gate, Rocket League, Cyberpunk 2077, Kingdom Come 1 and 2, Stardew Valley, Teardown, Instruments of Destruction, Pal World, Squirrel with a Gun, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, Fallout 4, Half-Life Alyx, Mass Effect Remastered, Hitman, and a ton of other games over the last couple years, almost entirely on that graphics card. It's quiet, it doesn't draw too much power, and it played the games that I want to play at high enough settings that I could enjoy them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't 4K Ultra, but when I'm playing games, I also don't focus on things like that. I don't focus on minor visual artifacts or 0.1% lows. I play games. Sometimes I wish people would focus on that instead of going all keyboard warrior about hardware and performance and best practices and rules when it comes to PC gaming. So, there you have it, a $63 motherboard and CPU combo paired with the most hated GPU in recent memory, playing basically any game at 1080p and medium settings. Hopefully, you enjoyed this one, and if you did, make sure to leave that comment down below. I'm actually planning on using this rig for a couple more upcoming videos, including comparing it to the Ryzen 3600 that I used in my upstairs gaming PC, and maybe pairing those to an RTX 5060 Ti and exploring CPU performance and potential bottlenecks. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss those. Support me on Patreon if you enjoy this type of content, as every backer really does help keep the lights on around here. And as a bonus, you'll get access to my exclusive Discord server, where you can chat directly with me, as well as the awesome community that hangs out over there. And that's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, everyone. Beer for today was sent over by a longtime friend of the channel, American Cosworth. It is the Brothers Cascadia Brewing Mystery of the Flying Lotus Hazy IPA, clocking in at 6.5%. Mystery of the Flying Lotus Hazy IPA. Brothers Cascadia Brewing. First off, I love the name Brothers Cascadia. That's such a great name. Enigma, Strata, and Lotus hops. I don't know that I'm enjoying this one all that much. It's a hazy with all of the late 2010s hazy IPA, New England IPA burn. A lot of that acid buildup. But there's not much of the payoff. The flavor is just not all that bold. It's not big, bright citrus. It's not dank IPA. The flavor profile itself falls a little bit flat. And while a lot of people would consider that very drinkable in a standard IPA, when you pair it with a hazy that hasn't figured out how to express big flavors yet, you get an IPA that just chews at the back of your throat, with not much reward for it. I think this IPA definitely has some potential, and I could see it doing very well not as a hazy IPA, but as it is, the flavors that are there are a little bit more earthy and vegetal, a la most Northwest IPAs. And turning it into a hazy doesn't make it a really good hazy. It makes it kind of a terrible Northwest IPA. I was hoping for a little bit better. I think it's drinkable. I think with the right food pairing, it could be pretty good. But as is, just sitting here on my desk, not the biggest fan.